In 2024, amid the parched Arizona desert and the dust-covered files of 36 years of despair, an unexpected truth surfaced like a miracle. The 6-year-old boy, snatched from his family's arms on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon, had been found, alive, grown up, and completely unaware that he had once been at the center of one of the most haunting missing child cases of the 1980s. Just weeks earlier, his entire world collapsed as if a cold blade had been driven straight through his heart. The name he had carried for 36 years was not his real one. The scattered childhood memories were not random. And he, Evan, was in fact Liam Foster, the child abducted in a fateful 18-minute window right in front of his own sister. Today, I'm taking you straight into the eye of the storm of a tragedy everyone thought would never be solved. What happened on that June afternoon in 1988, who took Liam from a Phoenix neighborhood, and how one tiny piece of DNA finally shattered the ice of a cold case to bring him home after more than 3 decades lost. This isn't just a case, it's one of the most intense, heartbreaking, yet brilliantly hopeful survival stories ever recorded in American true crime. You are my precious gems. Take a deep breath, because right now we're stepping into the story that made the whole world's heart clench. Before we dive into this real-life case that shocked the nation, let me know where you're watching from. And if you love journeys to recover long-forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Arizona in 1988 felt nothing like the sprawling urban giant the state is today. Quiet subdivisions stretched along the edges of Phoenix, sun-drenched streets. Kids still played outside without anyone thinking of danger, and neighbors knew each other so well that any stranger stood out immediately. Child abductions weren't yet a constant fear. The low-density community created a sense of safety, and middle-class families like the Fosters believed they were raising their kids in a place stable enough that they didn't have to be on guard every second. The Fosters lived in a single-story southwestern-style house with a terracotta-tiled roof and a low front fence, where sisters Grace and Liam Foster usually played in the mornings. Grace was 8, careful, mature beyond her years, and always glued to her little brother. Liam was 6, quick, always smiling, and followed his sister like a little shadow. Their parents, David and Marlene Foster, were stable working-class. Dad was an air conditioning repairman. Mom worked part-time at the neighborhood grocery store. Their life rolled along quietly, revolving around work hours, family dinners and weekend mornings when both kids played in the front yard while their parents got ready for the day. In the day or two before the incident, there were a few small details no one in the family noticed or connected. A silver sedan driving slowly past the house, the previous afternoon. A strange man walking through the neighborhood that no one recognized, and the sound of a car door opening and closing somewhere near the yard at dusk. Nothing was clear enough to signal danger, but later they all became scattered memories. Marlene would recall in panic. The morning Liam vanished was a gently sunny morning like any other. David had already left for work. Marlene was making breakfast in the kitchen, and the 2 kids had gone out to the front yard to play as usual. Grace later said Liam was running around the yard, laughing and kicking a small red ball. A few minutes later, Grace heard a car somewhere nearby. She glanced over but saw nothing unusual except the shadow of a sedan flashing quickly across the street. In that one moment of distraction, when she turned back, Liam was no longer standing beside her. At first, Grace thought he had just run to the corner of the yard or around the bicycle like he often did. But when she called his name and got no answer, a real wave of fear hit her. Grace ran inside screaming for Mom, her voice breaking with panic. Marlene dropped everything, bolted outside and started calling Liam's name, first loudly, then screaming so loud the neighbors heard. In less than 2 minutes the whole block was in uproar. Front doors flew open, neighbors ran over to help, some walked the sidewalks, some searched the side yards. Others ran to the end of the street. Everything happened in confused chaos because no one yet imagined the worst, only that Liam had disappeared unnaturally fast. Grace tried to tell her mom she had seen a silver car shadow, and thought there was a man standing near the fence when Liam vanished, but an 8-year-old's terrified memory came out in fragments. Marlene ran through the backyard, opened the shed, checked every hiding spot. Several neighbors searched under large bushes in the yard. Another group walked the sidewalk toward the main intersection. No one found a trace, no footsteps, no dropped toy, no sign Liam was still nearby. Within 5 minutes of realizing he was gone, The search had spread to the alleys behind the houses, the empty lots between homes, and the vacant land behind the block wall. No one had seen Liam leave the yard, and no one had seen an adult leading him away. It happened so fast the family couldn't process it. Fear turned to panic. Marlene ran back inside, hands shaking violently, and tried calling David at work, but he didn't pick up. Grace stood beside her mother, sobbing uncontrollably and repeating, "I only looked away for a sec." When dozens of neighbors searching for the first 10 critical minutes turned up nothing, Marlene finally ran inside, picked up the phone and dialed 911, and choked out that her 6-year-old son had just vanished from right in front of their house. When Marlene Foster's 911 call reached the Phoenix PD dispatch center, the operator immediately classified it as missing child, priority 1, the highest priority for a child gone without explanation. Within seconds, the call was routed to the 2 closest patrol units. Roughly 4 minutes after Marlene dialed, the first cruiser screeched into the neighborhood, lights still flashing as the 2 officers jumped out, ordered everyone to freeze, and began assessing the scene. The neighborhood chaos started to slow as residents stepped back onto the sidewalks to make way for police. Everyone knew time was now working against them. The first 2 officers quickly checked the front yard gate, fence, garage area, and side walkway. Seeing no signs of forced entry or anything dragged, they moved on to sketching a rough crime scene diagram, marking Liam's last known location. At the same time, one officer had Marlene recount everything step by step, while the other spoke gently with Grace, trying to keep his breathing and voice calm so she wouldn't spiral further. About 5 minutes after the first team arrived, a second unit showed up to begin a rapid perimeter search. In 1988 child abduction cases, Phoenix PD still relied heavily on manual searches. There were no GPS trackers, no drones, no widespread surveillance cameras. Cordoning off really meant dividing the area into radii and sweeping it by eyeball. Officers quickly established the front yard of the Foster house as ground zero, then expanded outward in a 1-mile. Teams of officers and volunteers were assigned routes, one east toward the Maryvale neighborhood, one west toward open lots, and another south, along the road, leading to the main artery. Everyone was told to check in every 3 minutes with anything unusual. While teams fanned out, the officer handling witnesses focused on those present from the very first moments. Grace Foster, the neighbor across the street, and a man walking his dog nearby when Liam disappeared. Grace's statement was still fragmented. "I saw a silver car shadow go by. I think there was a man by the fence," but when pressed for more detail she couldn't recall license plates, exact model, or any distinctive sound. The officer wrote everything down without pressure, knowing children often remember non-linearly. The neighbor said she heard an engine rev but didn't see direction because she was watering plants in her backyard. The dog walker said he noticed a silver car but didn't pay attention because it was moving slowly at the top of the block. These statements weren't enough for a clear picture yet, but they shared 3 common points. Silver car, male, quickly left the area. When the first reports came back to the on-scene commander, they also highlighted the era's biggest investigative limitation: no Amber Alert, no traffic cameras on side streets, no doorbell cams, and vehicle checks relied entirely on residents' eyes or lucky witness memory. That put the crucial early minutes at a severe disadvantage, because if Liam was placed in a car and driven away within 60-90 seconds, police had no image or proof of direction. The temporary lead investigator drew a paper map of the neighborhood, marked where Liam vanished, and plotted the 3 likely escape routes. Route 1: turn left onto the connector to the main boulevard, and blend into morning Phoenix traffic. Route 2: turn right toward vacant lots and small warehouses, a low-traffic area with multiple exits to the city outskirts. Route 3: continue straight to the small intersection, then either into dense housing or onto the loop road to the freeway. All 3 routes were wide open, unmonitored, and had no checkpoint. To rule out the suspect circling back or hiding nearby, one team meticulously checked every yard, every alley, every shed, under cars, and heavy brush for footprints, tire tracks, dropped items, or signs of struggle, but found nothing indicating Liam left on foot. That evidence strengthened the theory he was taken by vehicle within seconds of Grace turning away. By now more than 15 minutes had passed since the abduction, and every officer knew each additional second, increased the odds Liam was already far beyond their control radius. In the corner of the yard, Marlene sat crumpled on the ground, clutching her head while Grace stood beside her gripping her mother's shirt. Neighbors grew quiet as police shifted the scene to stricter protocol. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. This was no longer a simple neighborhood search for a wandering child. From the moment officers split into pursuit directions, Liam Foster's disappearance had become a confirmed child abduction. Immediately after the initial search teams spread out in 3 directions, the on-scene commander ordered a 3rd unit to begin a critical procedure. Canvass every ingress, egress of the subdivision to determine which route the silver sedan most likely took when fleeing. The subdivision where the Fosters lived had 4 main entrances, but only 2 connected directly to major roads. The other 2 were dead ends or looped through vacant lots. Officers split up to examine fresh tire marks, disturbed dust or anything unusual, though they knew Arizona's dry conditions rarely preserved clear tracks. At the east entrance, one officer noted tire marks that looked newer than the surrounding sand, but they weren't distinctive enough to identify vehicle type. The west exit led through a sparsely populated area with no witnesses, instantly making it a prime escape candidate. The remaining 2 entrances showed no turnaround or parking evidence, narrowing viable routes. As data from the entrance checks flowed back to command, the quick analysis team cross-referenced the silver car's timing using Grace's and neighbor's account. The moment Grace said the car shadow passed, matched when the neighbor heard the engine rev. That overlap between 2 separate vantage points allowed an estimated departure window, even with the acknowledged margin of error of several tens of seconds, typical of traumatized recall. Calculating vehicle speed became the next step. Officers used paper maps, rulers, and stopwatches to determine how long an older sedan traveling 20-30 miles per hour inside the neighborhood would take to reach each exit. Factoring in a few seconds to get Liam inside, total elapsed time from Grace turning away until the car cleared the block likely ranged only 45 to 75 seconds. That realization hit everyone hard. The suspect acted lightning fast, and almost certainly with advanced preparation, not opportunistically. When speed was overlaid on the map, only 3 escape routes remained logical: east to the main road, west to open land, or south via the loop to the freeway. The 3 routes were color-coded on the sketch. East was considered highest probability because it offered instant heavy traffic to disappear into. West, however, had the advantage of minimal witnesses, perfect for an abductor wanting to reach the city's outer road network unnoticed. South was less likely but kept active because of nearby warehouses and old parking lots where a vehicle could stop, switch direction, or even change cars. After route analysis, investigators re-examined every statement against actual timeline. Grace said she turned away for a few seconds, but child psychology suggested that could mean 10-15 seconds. The neighbor heard the engine right after finishing watering, corresponding to the moment morning sun angle peaked. The dog walker heard the car as he passed the 3rd house from the corner. These seemingly disconnected details, once plotted on the commander's reconstructed map, formed a logical timeline. Liam vanishes, Grace looks for him, silver car exits, east, neighbor hears rev, dog walker sees car accelerate. Despite 0 photos or physical evidence, the sequence sharpened dramatically. For certainty, the commander ordered a full 18-minute timeline reconstruction from Liam's last sighting. Starting at approximately 08:14 a.m., the closest confirmed time Liam was playing outside, to when the first patrol unit reported initial sweep complete. Those 18 minutes were broken into segments: 08:14, 08:15, Liam playing, Grace still chatting; 08:15, 08:16, Grace turns away, Liam taken; 08:16, 08:17, silver car exits, east, per estimate; 08:17, 08:19, neighbors hear engine, dog walker sees car speeding up; 08:19, 08:21, family Lelis, no response. Marlene tries calling David; 08:21, 08:24, neighbors begin searching; 08:24, 08:26, no trace in backyards or vacant spaces; 08:28. It also established that searching the immediate area would yield little, and police efforts now had to pivot to reconstructing the abductor's escape route, using only those fleeting minutes and the imperfect but only witness statements they had at the time. Identifying 3 feasible escape routes made the investigation team realize that the suspect's vehicle played a central role in the disappearance, and as soon as the initial 18-minute timeline was reconstructed, the commander shifted focus to locating the silver sedan, described by witnesses. Police immediately requested the Arizona Vehicle Registration Support Unit to pull records of all silver cars, mid-80s to late 80s models, matching the body style mentioned by Grace and 2 other witnesses. In 1988, the vehicle recording system was still primitive and not fully digitized, so filtering the list was slow. Officers had to combine old computer archives with paper files. After nearly an hour of compilation, the preliminary list showed hundreds of silver sedans in the Phoenix area, models like Toyota Camry, Nissan Stanza, Chevrolet Celebrity, and Oldsmobile Cutlass, all common at the time. However, the team couldn't check every car immediately, so the next step was to narrow the list by radius. Based on the escape route analysis from the previous section, officers chose a 5-mile radius from the foster home as the priority zone, since that was the distance a car could travel in 10-12 minutes at average steady speed, fitting the reconstructed 18. Cross-referencing this radius with ownership data shrank the list to about 70 vehicles, a number still large, but far more manageable. From there, investigators began filtering based on whether the car was driven or parked in the area on the morning of the incident. They went door to door asking who in the neighborhood commuted in a silver car, who parked on the street, and who left home before or right after the disappearance. Several cars were eliminated immediately because their owners had solid alibis, working early shifts at distant industrial parks, or the car had been broken down and sitting in a garage for days. Another batch was ruled out because they belonged to long-time residents, whose neighbors confirmed the cars never moved that morning. This brought the list down to roughly 20 vehicles needing deeper check. At the same time, a separate officer started working from witness statements about the license plate. Though no one remembered the full plate, one person thought it contained the letter C, another believed the first character was a 4, but these scattered details could still be combined to scan the system for matching plates in the area. The PD data unit generated lists of plates that fit the possible characters, but because of inaccuracies in witness memory, they had to check each one manually. Some matching plates belonged to city employees whose morning routes were verified unrelated. Others belonged to elderly owners who hadn't driven in years. After these exclusions, only 12 vehicles remained marked as cannot be eliminated yet, the group requiring direct contact in the next step. Parallel to plate and owner searches, police also knew that bodywork or repainting would be a key way to find indirect evidence. If the abductor feared identification, he might have taken the car to a small garage to repair the door or body panels, to hide marks. Officers therefore contacted dozens of garages within a 10-mile radius, asking whether anyone brought in a silver sedan for repairs in the 48 hours before or after the disappearance. Large shops were easy to verify because they kept clear logs. Volume was high but records were complete, allowing quick eliminations. Small garages were harder because many kept poor records and relied on vague memory. One owner recalled a man inquiring about replacing a side mirror on a silver sedan, but couldn't remember the plate or the man's face. Police noted it and added that shop to the follow-up list. Other garages reported silver car repairs around the relevant dates, but when addresses were checked, most were ordinary family vehicles with no schedule that matched the investigation timeline. The sweep yielded no breakthrough but eliminated additional innocent cars. By the end of the analysis day, the suspect vehicle list had been trimmed to a tight group of 10-12 silver sedans, all fitting to some degree the witness descriptions and escape route analysis. Each car in this final pool was prioritized for checking against 3 criteria: how closely it matched Grace's statement, the owner's morning movements, and the car's parked or driving location between 08:15, the window believed to be when the suspect placed Liam in the vehicle. The team knew finding the right car would unlock the case's critical path, and once the list was this short, they began preparing to approach each owner individually, ask about alibis and morning whereabouts, and if necessary, request direct inspection of the bodywork for any trace evidence linked to Liam Foster's disappearance. Once the silver car list was narrow enough for hands-on checks, the investigation moved to the next phase, building a profile of the abductor from the scant information provided by witnesses with Grace's account remaining the most important. With no cameras or photos, everything depended on memories formed in seconds of chaos. The characteristics Grace supplied, though vague, remained the only foundation for a basic suspect image. An adult male, average build, wearing a dark baseball cap, carrying a red bag, and standing near the fence right before Liam vanished. The two other witnesses confirmed seeing a male figure in the area that morning, but from their distance they could only describe quick movement and offered no detail on face or clothing. Still, the fact all three accounts included a man and silver car convinced investigators this was not random coincidence. Police began analyzing behavior, comparing events to child abduction patterns the FBI had compiled in 1980s reports. Several patterns matched. The suspect approached when the child was unsupervised for mere seconds, acted swiftly without prolonged interaction, fled the scene instantly by motor vehicle, chose a busy residential neighborhood in the morning, when people are distracted and less likely to notice unusual sounds. This suggested the abductor likely stalked beforehand rather than acted impulsively. If true, the offender probably had experience, prior similar crimes, a record involving children, or had been in the area multiple times to learn when parents weren't watching. The team widened the search for strangers seen in the neighborhood in the 7 to 10 days prior. They asked every house about unfamiliar delivery workers, repairmen, pedestrians, or anyone lingering near the front yards at odd hours. One woman said a few days earlier she saw a man standing on the corner smoking for a long time, assuming he was visiting the house across the street. Another resident reported seeing a man walk through the block 2-3 times in one afternoon. Unusual because it wasn't a through street for pedestrians. An early morning newspaper delivery driver recalled someone standing beside a light-colored sedan, but he couldn't be sure of the exact color because it was still dim. None of these accounts identified anyone, but they formed a pattern, a male appearing multiple times in the days before, not a local resident possibly watching the Fosters' routine. Investigators then cross-checked records of registered sex offenders and anyone with child-related priors within a 10-mile radius. The list was sizable. 1980s suburban Phoenix had several individuals arrested for molesting minors or disorderly conduct in residential areas. However, not everyone on the list had reason to be near the Foster home. Police narrowed to those with plausible cause to be in the neighborhood: delivery drivers, utility technicians, door-to-door salesmen, or transients previously spotted around Maryvale. Among the prior offender files, a 34-year-old arrested in 1985 for attempting to lure children at a mall lived 7 miles away, but he worked night shifts and had a verified alibi that morning. A 42-year-old with child-related disturbances near Glendale was considered, but records showed he was working in Tucson that day. One freelance delivery driver stood out more because he owned a light-colored sedan, yet the model didn't match witness description. Though eliminated, the case showed the team was on the right track, finding people with legitimate reason to be in the area and a matching vehicle. Investigators also looked at transient and temporary workers, especially those on city utility or construction projects, who moved through neighborhoods without being recognized. When interviewed at job sites, several said they weren't in Maryvale that week, but one worker reported seeing a stranger near the vacant lot beside the Foster house twice the previous week. No one knew who he was. By combining these scattered sources, the team finally circled a small pool of potential suspects, who met 3 criteria: adult male seen around the block before the abduction, and able to approach children without drawing attention. The list was short, only 5 to 6 individuals, but sufficient to move to in-depth examination of each. Though no direct evidence yet existed, the repeated strange man description plus a matching vehicle seen multiple times convinced investigators the abductor was very likely among this group, and interviewing each one would be the next step to uncover any link to Liam Foster's disappearance. The data compiled from neighbors and Grace's initial statements had only produced a rough suspect outline, and the team quickly realized the remaining key to clarifying vague points still lay in the memory of this 8-year-old girl. A second interview was arranged in the Phoenix PD Victim Support Room, using child-specific protocols designed to let Grace's memories surface as naturally as possible. The goal was not to make her retell the entire event, but to separate accurate recall from distorted memory and identify consistent details usable for investigation. Children's memories typically center on strong emotions, overall shapes, and standout colors, so interviewers began with open questions about the morning she played with Liam and what she noticed before her brother was no longer in the yard. From the first descriptions, Grace confirmed the man near the fence wore a dark baseball cap, dark clothing, and carried a red bag shaped like a grocery tote. The color elements, dark clothing and bright red bag, appeared consistently every time Grace mentioned, so they were rated highly reliable. Questions about face, skin tone, or voice, however, left Grace confused or produced inconsistent answers, leading interviewers to note she lacked ability to retain fine details under panic. Sound-related claims like a loud car door slam were considered prone to distortion because nearby witnesses didn't corroborate them, whereas the shadow of the silver car passing received support from multiple accounts. Interviewers dug deeper into the points Grace remembered most clearly to test overlap with other evidence. She described the man standing in the exact same spot multiple times she had noticed the previous week, the fence area beside the foster yard. This matched resident reports of a stranger was seen at the corner at odd times. The information was deemed extremely significant because it strengthened the premeditation theory. Details Grace stated confidently were flagged as original data, while anything said hesitantly or that changed between questions was removed from core information to avoid building a false profile. When sorted, investigators identified three critical points: the repeated appearances of a man in a dark cap, the red bag always with him, and the position near the fence coinciding with Liam's disappearance. These tied directly to neighbor reports of a strange man seen multiple days prior, turning previously fragmented tips into a continuous chain. Early theories of an opportunistic offender faded, while the premeditated stalking suspect theory rose to top priority. The new data from Grace allowed the team to refine the suspect model: adult male, average build, appearing repeatedly at the same neighborhood spot, habitually carrying a red bag uncommon for men at that time, and watching the foster yard during hours parents were less vigilant. Grace's consistency on distance, position, and colors gave investigators greater confidence in that portion of the description even though she couldn't recall a face. From that session, the team could clearly separate reliable from unreliable information, adding crucial strokes to the suspect portrait built in the previous phase, and confirming the investigation focus lay not only on the silver sedan, but equally on the man seen multiple times with the distinctive features Grace managed to retain from the moment of the abduction. The data, newly reinforced through the in-depth interview with Grace, made the investigation team realize that the suspect profile could no longer revolve solely around the silver sedan. It also had to encompass men who repeatedly appeared in the area with deliberate observational behavior. The pace of the investigation accelerated with the expansion of the screening scope, starting with a list of high-risk individuals within a 5-10-mile radius of the foster neighborhood, including those with prior convictions related to children, harassment, unlawful entry, or records of recent residents whose occupations were unclear. Phoenix PD, in coordination with Maricopa County, compiled a list of over 100 records that initially met the criteria, then narrowed it down to a few dozen names by cross-referencing physical characteristics matching Grace's description, while eliminating subjects with clear alibis. The remaining shortlisted records were analyzed for behavioral patterns, frequency of movement in the area, tendencies to watch young children, daily habits, and any previously documented psychological issues. At the same time, ground search teams were deployed to expand checks of locations that could serve as temporary stops after the crime: abandoned houses, old warehouses, and inactive factories on the western edge of Phoenix, where many dirt roads led to the highway. These sites were mapped according to a travel time radius consistent with the original 18-minute timeline, to determine whether the suspect could have stopped or switched vehicles in a remote area. Despite the broad search, no direct physical evidence was recovered, no signs that a child had been held, no items linked to Liam. The second part of the expansion focused on transient populations, particularly temporary workers at construction sites, repair shops, delivery crews, or units that regularly moved through the area at the time of the incident. Phoenix in the late 1980s had a large number of short-term contract workers who rented cheap rooms or stayed week to week and frequently changed location. Lists from motels along the highways were collected. The investigation team screened names of guests who checked out abruptly within 48 hours of the. However, most records from that era were handwritten, lacked identification photos, and the majority of front desk staff could not accurately recall guests, making this avenue nearly fruitless. The previously compiled list of silver sedan owners was cross-referenced with the behavioral suspect pool. Vehicles matching technical specifications, paint color, model year and time frame of appearance in the area were checked to see if the owner or regular driver matched either Grace's behavioral description. Still, many vehicles on the list belonged to ordinary families, office workers, or stay-at-home mothers, so narrowing the field yielded little progress. Some owners reported lending their cars to friends or acquaintances around the time of the incident, but although noted, this information lacked sufficient evidence to directly connect to Liam's disappearance. Additionally, the absence of automated license plate systems, traffic cameras and movement data meant the question which silver sedan entered the neighborhood that morning remained unanswerable. Efforts to trace leads from warehouses, industrial areas, transient workers, and the suspect vehicle list all converged on one reality. The file grew thicker but no breakthrough emerged. The scattered clues, strange men appearing, a silver car speeding away, a red bag remained isolated fragments that refused to form a picture. Phoenix PD had to accept that despite exhausting every reasonable avenue, no direct evidence pointed to Liam's location or the suspect's identity, pushing the investigation into a prolonged phase, though not yet officially deemed a dead end. The recently implemented expansion efforts, despite covering every feasible area within a 10-mile radius, failed to produce any connections strong enough to advance the investigation, and as the initial 90-day mark passed, Phoenix PD was forced to compile a full review to assess the level of impasse. The internal report showed the team had screened over 100 high-risk individuals, examined dozens of silver sedans, searched industrial zones, abandoned houses and old warehouses, and re-interviewed residents throughout the entire neighborhood multiple times, yet still recovered no direct physical evidence or trace indicating where Liam had been taken. The remaining details, a man in a dark cap, a red bag, a silver sedan without a clear plate, lacked identifying elements, keeping them at the level of behavioral descriptions rather than actionable evidence. The report's analysis identified three critical factors. The extremely brief time frame of the incident left witnesses with only fragmented images. Late 1980s residential areas had no outdoor security cameras, and vehicle lodging and transient labor management systems were not yet digitized, creating major obstacles to every tracing effort. Meanwhile, the most promising leads, the suspect's possible prior appearances, the strange car speeding out of the neighborhood, the possibility of a stop in outlying industrial areas, lacked physical corroboration, leaving the chain of events obscure. With no new feasible methods available, the file was transferred per procedure to the Phoenix PD Cold Case Unit, which handles long-term missing persons cases with no active lead. Preservable evidence, fabric fibers collected near the fence, an unclassifiable shoe print, composite sketches, and original witness statements, was sealed in long-term storage for possible future re-examination if technology and active investigation ceased. But the case was not permanently closed, it shifted to passive monitoring status, meaning the cold case unit would reactivate only if significant new information emerged from outside. As law enforcement gradually withdrew from the area, the Foster family refused to let the matter fade into oblivion. They printed their own flyers, mailed letters to other precincts in Maricopa County, contacted shopping centers for permission to post flyers, and compiled lists of silver cars seen in the neighborhood months later, despite lacking clear evidence. Both Grace and the parents continued searching in their own ways, driving dirt roads leading to the highway, questioning roadside store owners, visiting cheap motels where transients had stayed. None of them would accept that the case had entered a quiet phase. Yet despite the family's efforts lasting many months, every independent search ended the same way. No trace, no new witnesses, and no change to the core information since the day Liam vanished. The official file entered a frozen state, and the city of Phoenix gradually came to regard it as one of the heartbreaking missing child cases of that era that lacked the investigative tools to solve. The Foster family's independent search efforts smoldered for many months after the case officially went cold, and amid that prolonged stalemate, An unexpected tip arrived when a witness in Gallup, New Mexico called the Phoenix PD tip line reporting they had seen a boy aged about 6 or 7, who strongly resembled Liam walking with an unknown woman at a rest stop along Interstate. The information was immediately forwarded to the cold case unit, as this was the first time since the case went silent that someone from another state reported seeing a child matching the description. The team quickly analyzed the Phoenix Gallup route. If the suspect left the Foster neighborhood heading north, merged onto I-17, then took I-40 east, the drive to Gallup took roughly 4 hours, entirely feasible for an abductor wanting to leave Arizona as quickly as possible. This made the lead far more credible than previous tips. According to the witness, the woman with the boy was about 30, with brown hair tied in a ponytail, wearing a faded denim jacket, and carrying nothing notable except an old cloth bag. She appeared guarded when others looked at the child. The description did not match details Grace had provided, but that did not rule out the possibility the suspect handed the child to someone else, or was traveling with an accomplice. Phoenix PD worked with the Gallup Police Department to gather additional statements, collecting information from gas station employees, truck drivers, and local residents. Several people said they had seen the pair a few times that week, but no one could identify them because they used no real names and did not appear in any businesses that kept guest record. This raised the theory that the woman might be homeless, a freelance worker, or someone moving state to state without leaving a paper trail. The investigation continued, focusing on transients in New Mexico, especially women traveling with undocumented young children. Gallup PD reviewed local reports, cross-checked lists of children without temporary residency, and contacted social service agencies, but found no cases matching Liam's age and appearance. When Phoenix PD requested comparisons of signatures, medical records, or any paperwork related to young children in the Gallup area, the results still showed no matches. The more they checked, the more the team realized the witness might have mistaken a local child with similar features, or the woman was unrelated and simply happened to be there when the tipster noticed. Additionally, describing a boy who looked like Liam at age 6 or 7 made verification difficult, since Liam had only been missing a short time and physical features were easily confused. Although the Phoenix to Gallup route was logical, there was no supporting evidence the suspect ever traveled it, and the lack of traffic cameras in neighboring states, in the late 1980s, made tracing nearly impossible. After weeks of coordination between Arizona and New Mexico, all collected data led nowhere, causing what initially seemed a major lead to join the long list of unverifiable tips. The cold case unit noted it as one of the highest potential leads ever received, yet impossible to prove with physical evidence. Final outcome: the Gallup lead officially stalled, and the Liam Foster file remained dormant, awaiting new information with more substance than any previous call. The disappointments from the Gallup lead forced the cold case unit to return to the case's core foundation, and the first step was to rescreen every statement collected during the initial 3 months, to see if any detail had been undervalued or obscured by the flood of fragmented information at the time. Each statement was assigned a credibility score based on consistency, the witness's location, and their ability to directly observe the event. The result left only 3 data groups worth retaining. Grace's descriptions from residents living along the same street, and reports of a silver sedan leaving the neighborhood at the matching time. When all this data was combined and fed into a model of the critical first 18 minutes, the window from when Liam was still standing in the yard until the moment the Foster family could no longer see him anywhere, the cold case unit began rebuilding the event sequence in a new order, hoping to reduce the noise compared to the original timeline. The analytical model showed the perpetrator almost certainly scouted the area beforehand, because the actual time frame was far too short for a random passerby to spot a child, decide to abduct him and act, all in the same moment. The repeated sightings Grace had mentioned, a man in a dark cap standing in the same spot on multiple days, were treated as indirect evidence of prior preparation, and this piece, combined with residents' accounts of a stranger displaying vigilant behavior, made the pre-selected target scenario the most probable direction. The cold case unit developed 3 scenarios for testing. First, the suspect was someone local or who regularly passed through the area, watched for days, then struck when the family let their guard down. Second, the suspect was an outsider with a clear motive, such as moving across states to avoid detection or being part of a child trafficking ring. Third, The suspect had no specific motive, and the act was triggered impulsively upon randomly seeing Liam. When the three scenarios were measured against the 18-minute timeline, the third proved the least viable because the speed of movement, point of appearance and the subject's calm demeanor did not fit an impulsive act. Not to mention the stranger had been seen multiple days earlier. The first and second scenarios both had some supporting data, but no physical evidence existed to distinguish between them. The silver sedan data was also insufficient to lean toward local or out of state, as the vehicle description was too common and no matches were found in any record. Upon completing the new timeline, the cold case unit realized that while the event structure was now clearer and tighter than ever, it still produced no new data that could be converted into grounds for reopening the investigation. No new physical evidence, no new witnesses and no cross-state matching leads meant the final decision remained unchanged. The Liam Foster file stayed an insufficient basis to reopen status. Once again the case fell silent, and although the time analysis model was more refined than ever, it still could not deliver the breakthrough the investigators had hoped for. The cold case unit's reconstructed timeline helped the Foster family better understand what might have happened during those fateful 18 minutes, but it also confirmed the painful reality that the investigating agency had no further tools to move forward. With the file remaining frozen, the Fosters took matters into their own hands for years, building an independent, decades-long search campaign that swung repeatedly between hope and despair. They mapped every area already searched and expanded the radius by dozens of miles, traveling to farther communities in Flagstaff, Tucson and even near the New Mexico border, handing out flyers at shopping centers, bus stations and gas stations. When the internet became widespread, they created a dedicated website for Liam, collecting every report of missing or sighted children with strangers across the southwestern United States. Thanks to their persistence, NCMEC took notice, and assisted by releasing age-progressed sketches of Liam at 6, 10 and 14 years old, then continuing to update them over time. Local Phoenix television stations ran multiple segments asking for information, especially on disappearance anniversaries, putting Liam's image on screen whenever a similar case made news and prompting the community to remember the boy's name once more. Still, those programs only raised awareness. They never produced a real breakthrough. Every time someone reported seeing a child who looked like Liam, the Fosters embarked on another journey carrying fragile hope, but almost every lead was wrong. Local children misidentified, temporarily lost kids, or children from nomadic communities that caused witnesses to mistake age and hair color. Years of repeated false signals gradually drained the family's spirit, yet they refused to quit because nothing was worse than accepting that Liam had vanished forever. While the parents constantly traveled in search, Grace, the only child who witnessed the moment her brother was taken, grew up carrying that heavy memory. She carried guilt though no one blamed her. Each new lead that collapsed brought the experience back as vividly as the first day. As a teenager, she joined her parents on many searches, but constant exposure to other missing child cases caused lasting psychological effects, sometimes causing her to avoid any story involving abducted children. Even so, Grace kept the habit of checking NCMEC reports and pinning the latest age-progressed photo of Liam on her bedroom bulletin board as a private promise no one forced her to make. The Foster family's efforts lasted decades yet yielded no progress. Official reports about Liam virtually disappeared from the news, and the file at Phoenix PD remained unchanged in the cold case unit's storage, both in structure and content. All that remained was the fragile hope of a family that refused to let go, unaware that their 36-year journey would eventually be rewritten in a way none of them could have imagined. The Fosters' long and desperate search existed in parallel with a completely separate life Liam experienced under the name Evan, a life Rosemary Harris constructed from the very first days after taking him from Phoenix to hide the truth. The name change happened so quickly that Evan never formed a continuous memory of his real identity. For him, everything began in the small motel room where Rosemary first called him by his new name, and never explained why it was necessary. After creating the false identity, Rosemary constantly moved through southwestern states, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and later into northern Texas. Each move was sudden, usually announced only with a brief, "We have to." Evan's entire childhood unfolded in a rootless state. No long-term friends, no stable school. Registrations at small-town schools were always explained as the family just moved here, and when teachers asked for previous records, Rosemary stalled, then left town before more questions arose. Paying everything in cash helped her avoid leaving traces in medical or educational systems, so Evan grew up with virtually no official records attached to him. Those fragments of life shaped the relationship between Evan and Rosemary, a contradictory bond of total dependence. Evan saw her as the only person he had, while Rosemary maintained that position by controlling information, burying the past, and planting the belief that the outside world was full of danger. The stories she told about Evan's origins were always vague. "You have no one else. I found you in circumstances where no one would protect you." He had no way to compare or question, so he believed that life with Rosemary, unstable as it was his only safety. That atmosphere of control seeped into every small detail. Evan was rarely allowed to go far on his own, friendships were restricted, and any extended conversation with strangers was interrupted by Rosemary. Whenever someone asked too much, she immediately packed up and took Evan to another town, as if every social interaction carried the risk of exposing the secret she had built. As Evan grew older, the stories Rosemary spun were no longer enough to cover the gap. He began noticing he had no memories before age 4, no family memories beyond Rosemary, no images of steady friends, and especially the occasional dream fragments. A light-colored fence, a little girl standing nearby, harsh sunlight on a yard, the sound of an engine very close. He couldn't name anyone in those memories, but the sense of familiarity confused him every time he woke up. The fragments were tiny, but they appeared often enough to create conflict between the life Evan believed was real and something distant still buried in his mind. As a teenager, Evan began feeling suffocated by the no more than 2 seasons in one place lifestyle. Sometimes he wanted to ask why they couldn't stay anywhere longer, but Rosemary's wary look always silenced the question. Still, growing suspicion made him pay closer attention to her behavior. The way she flinched at news reports about missing children, the way she avoided traffic cops, the way she never let him hold any ID documents himself. Those signs weren't enough for him to piece together the truth, but were enough to create a quiet distance between them. Evan continued living according to the rules Rosemary set because he had no other choice, but inside, the scattered childhood memories began taking clearer shape, as if a long-locked memory was starting to crack at certain points. As Evan matured further, contact with the outside world through temporary jobs and limited social relationships made him realize no one else had such a blank childhood. No one moved constantly without clear reason, and no one lived for years without a single official document. Those doubts would later become the foundation for Evan to confront his real past when every secret began to unravel from those seemingly trivial memories. The quiet suspicion Evan had always carried about his origins gradually turned into a genuine urge once he began interacting with peers who all had families, school records, birth certificates, and clear childhood stories, things Evan completely lacked. The desire to understand himself was no longer based on vague memories alone, but also on the emptiness he felt every time he had to fill in the family history sections on job applications or medical forms. He decided to seek answers in a way Rosemary could not control, sending a sample to a commercial DNA testing service that was popular among young people, initially just hoping to discover distant relatives or ancestral origins. When the kit was mailed off, Evan had no idea that this ordinary act had just tapped into the very technology that cold case units in multiple states now relied on to reconnect long-faded cases from them. The testing company's system took several weeks to process, then automatically generated a family tree based on shared DNA segments with other users in its database. Evan was stunned when the results showed no common local surnames from the areas where he had lived with Rosemary, but instead revealed a cluster of completely unfamiliar surnames with high compatibility on the maternal line, one of them being Foster. The service's algorithm immediately flagged it as a close family match, and suggested that Evan might belong to a family searching for a missing relative. Following its community safety protocol, the company forwarded matches of exceptionally high similarity to the NCMEC-linked system, a mechanism most users never knew existed but which law enforcement could access for long-term missing child cases. Evan's DNA profile was compared against the database of never-recovered missing children. Within hours, the system placed it next to the file of a 6-year-old boy who vanished from Phoenix in Liam Foster. Although not yet conclusive, the maternal line segment match was strong enough to indicate a probable direct relationship, triggering an alert to the Arizona Department of Public Safety (DPS), the state agency responsible for missing persons files and authorized to request deeper forensic comparison. DPS received the match with extreme caution, as the system still produced hundreds of false leads each year. However, Liam Foster's case fell into the long-term critical missing child category, meaning any credible indicator required immediate preliminary verification. The first step was to pull the Foster family's old DNA reference samples, collected and preserved after the early 2000s. The original samples from the parents and Grace were still in storage. DPS downloaded the raw data from the commercial lab, converted it to forensic format, and ran a deeper comparison. The results did not disprove the match. In fact, they strengthened it. Evan's segments aligned with Liam's maternal line had a probability bordering on first-degree relative. This was strong enough for DPS to move the file to active verification status, the intermediary step between suspicion and full reinvestigation. From here, DPS needed to identify the sample submitter name, result delivery address, payment method. Everything pointed to Evan living in a small Utah town, using a legal name but with no corresponding birth record in any system. That alone heightened suspicion without needing to touch his past. Everything was prepared to hand off to the appropriate agency for the next step, a step regarded as the most significant breakthrough since Liam disappeared from Phoenix 36 years earlier. The DNA signal from the genealogy system left DPS unable to keep the file in passive monitoring status, and as soon as the data pointed to an individual in Utah, who was likely Liam Foster, the Phoenix PD cold case unit was reactivated for the first time in decades. The new lead investigator, trained under modern forensic standards, began by reviewing all the old sealed evidence from the late 1980s. The piece of cloth found near the Foster fence, unclassified shoe prints, Grace's original statement transcript and crude suspect sketches. To a 2024 investigator, these items no longer held direct evidentiary value but remained useful for behavioral comparison, especially the consistency between Grace's description and the fragmented memories Evan had provided in his DPS report. That cross-reference became the key factor, proving that two streams of information, completely separate for decades, were actually describing the same event. When the 1988 investigation was re-evaluated against modern standards, the cold case team recognized unavoidable limitations of the era. No residential CCTV, no digitized vehicle tracking systems, no interstate database integration, and no Amber Alert protocol, meaning the critical first 18 minutes were never fully exploited. These shortcomings were noted not to assign blame, but to determine which old data could still be repurposed with today's technology. The new investigator remapped Phoenix area movement in 1988, then overlaid it with Rosemary's multi-state travel patterns over the following 3 decades. Random details from Evan's life reports, small towns in New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah, gradually formed a recognizable migration route. When those points were linked with restored federal tax records, old rental records, and private clinic logs showing patients under false names, the team began reconstructing Rosemary's journey, leaving Arizona via I-17, briefly joining I-40, then moving in short hops between neighboring states, with no long stays anywhere. The pattern matched how many child abductors traveled in the pre-digital tracing era. When Evan's file and Liam's file were placed side by side, the overlap became striking. No birth record, no school records, no pre-age 4 identification, the guardian's erratic movement, the absence of relatives, fragmented memories of a light-colored fence and a little girl. Details that perfectly matched the Foster home and Grace's position on the day of the disappearance. In the report Evan had filed with DPS, he had described dreams of a car door slamming hard, front yard lights, and the shadow of a stranger, all matching Grace's. When forensic, behavioral, and memory data were synchronized, Cold Case Command concluded that the probability Evan was Liam Foster far exceeded coincidence. Legal procedure required an official decision to change the file status from frozen to reinvestigated. After more than 3 decades, Phoenix PD filed the paperwork to reopen the case, an exceedingly rare action that only occurs when a game-changing breakthrough appears. The file was moved from archives back to active desks, marking the first time since the 1980s that the name Liam Foster returned to the priority list. The focus of the new phase was no longer chasing an unknown suspect, but verifying Evan's identity, mapping Rosemary's route, and preparing for the crucial next step, determining whether a life erased 36 years ago could be fully restored. With the case officially reopened, Phoenix PD could finally take the step impossible in the late 1980s, forensic-level DNA identity confirmation. The cold case unit, working with Arizona DPS, contacted the Foster family to collect fresh genetic samples from the parents and Grace, ensuring higher quality references than the decades-old stored sample. The collection took place in a heavy atmosphere, the family oscillating between hope and wariness after too many false leads. Still, they agreed because for the first time, authorities said they had a match strong enough to compare. The new samples were sent to the DPS crime lab, where the genetics team applied next-generation sequencing capable of analyzing hundreds of markers instead of the few dozen used 2 decades earlier. The 3 Foster samples, father, mother, and Grace, were combined into a full biological family reference profile. At the same time, Evan's DNA had been pulled from the genealogy data, but a direct sample was still required for confirmation. Utah State Police, in coordination, obtained a legal blood sample from Evan during a civil identity verification process that met federal standards. Once both complete datasets were loaded, multiple comparison rounds were run. Father, child, mother, child, sibling, and finally the combined family model. The results appeared on the third run, compatibility above 99.99%, a figure that effectively ruled out coincidence. The lab sent a preliminary report to DPS, which immediately classified it as the strongest level identification match in legal terms. Confirming that Evan was Liam rested not on DNA alone, but on the convergence of multiple factors: genetic data, memory formation timeline, matching travel route, and the entire case context. DNA simply served as the final pillar to legalize what the investigation pieces had already revealed. DPS forwarded the file to Phoenix PD to complete the official identification report, a mandatory procedure when a missing person is found alive under a different identity. The report included all test results, Evan's background evaluation, behavioral analysis of Rosemary, and alignment with the Liam Foster missing person file. With all documents complete, Phoenix PD created a new legal file, merging both identities, Liam Foster and Evan Harris, into one person, ending the 36-year separation. An internal meeting was held to plan the notification process for the Foster family. This step could not be rushed, given the complex psychological impact on both the victim and the family. The cold case unit had to consider timing, wording, and post-notification mental health support. Simultaneously, they coordinated with Utah State Police on how to approach Evan without causing panic, since many individuals abducted as young children suffer severe shock upon learning their true name and all details were incorporated into a 3-phase plan: final verification through direct conversation, notification to the Foster family, and then an initial reunion in a controlled environment. From this point forward, the conclusion that Evan is Liam Foster became legal fact, and all investigative activity shifted to managing the aftermath of a life erased from records for over 3 decades. The confirmed DNA results and the completed forensic identification report were immediately forwarded to Phoenix PD, and just hours later, the cold case unit convened a private meeting with the Foster family at headquarters to disclose the findings in accordance with protocol for long-term missing persons discovered alive. The atmosphere in the conference room was so tense that every small sound felt heavy. The Foster family had grown accustomed to disappointment, so even though they had been summoned under the condition of important information, they still carried the same guarded defensiveness they had carried through countless previous occasions. The lead investigator explained the entire process, from the moment the genealogy system flagged the DNA alert until DPS conducted forensic-level matching, then emphasized that a 99.99% result was not a margin of doubt, but a definitive conclusion under U.S. legal standards. That moment left all 3 family members, father, mother, and Grace, in a state of near immediate emotional paralysis. After 36 years of believing their son was either dead or forever beyond reach, The truth was now placed before them with absolute certainty, producing a collision of exhilaration and stunned disbelief. When the silence finally broke, Phoenix PD began outlining the next steps for cases where a victim reappears after decades. Authorities cannot simply deliver the news and leave contact to the family. Every stage must follow victim recovery protocol to prevent psychological harm. Because individuals raised under a different identity typically have extremely fragile self-concepts, PD presented a phased reunion plan, starting with assessing Evan's readiness for a first meeting, followed by the moment the family would be permitted contact, and finally the official reunion in a stable environment with psychologists present. The foster family was advised that Evan knew nothing about them beyond a few fragmented memories. He had no family memory framework, and imposing emotions or expectations could cause him to withdraw, rather than move forward. Grace in particular was stressed to prepare mentally because she was the only one with direct memories of the abduction moment. Those memories could return with vivid intensity upon seeing Evan, and the support team wanted to ensure she would not become overwhelmed. As part of mental preparation, Phoenix PD also recommended the family attend short-term counseling to calibrate expectations. Because a reunion after 36 years bears no resemblance to found missing child cases of short duration. Evan is an adult with his own life, habits and identity, and reintegration, if it occurs, must happen in small incremental steps. The meeting also allocated time to explain the legal procedures that would need to be processed, updating Liam Foster's identification records, reissuing a birth certificate, restoring personal records, and conducting a backward investigation into how Rosemary used false identity to raise Evan. The family was informed they would not need to participate directly in these legal aspects, but the final outcomes would change their son's legal status and lay the groundwork for future steps if Evan wished to reconnect. Once all information had been presented, the Foster family signed the acknowledgement of receipt of results, opening a new chapter in a journey they had thought ended years earlier. A journey now leading to a meeting they once believed they would never have the chance to witness. The process of working with Evan was designed with extreme care, focusing not on forcing him to remember the past, but on creating a safe space where useful memory fragments could surface naturally and then be gradually organized for investigative purposes. The initial sessions took place in the presence of a psychologist specializing in long-term child abduction victims, a lead investigator, and a note-taking investigator. Every question was openly structured, avoiding direct suggestion so as not to inadvertently implant false memories in Evan's mind. Early focus was placed on the scattered images Evan had already mentioned in the DNA report: a sun-drenched front yard, a light-colored fence, the silhouette of a little girl, the loud slam of a car door, and the uneasy sensation of being lifted off the ground. Evan was encouraged to describe them in his own words, then gradually extend the thread to adjacent moments: what happened right before getting into the car, what the car smelled like, whether he heard music or adult voices, whether the drive felt long or short. Investigators were not trying to pin down every tiny detail, but instead watched for memory anchors: the color of the car interior, window positioning, whether the car stopped in a noisy or quiet place, male or female voice. One pattern that emerged across multiple interviews was that Evan always clearly distinguished between memories of the strange man and Rosemary, despite having spent most of his life solely with Rosemary. In his earliest memories, he recalled sitting in the back seat on the left, seeing a man's arm on the steering wheel, the lingering smell of cigarette smoke, and a faded sticker on the windshield he couldn't read. Rosemary only appeared in later memories, in a different room, explaining that she was the one who found him. This clue strengthened the hypothesis that Rosemary was not the person who directly abducted Liam in Phoenix, but received the child afterward from a male subject. From the interviews, the investigative team began compiling a list of place names Evan had heard mentioned or seen on road signs throughout his upbringing: town names, highway names, specific locations such as gas stations, small grocery stores, little churches, campground. Evan did not remember the sequence, but he could associate them with approximate ages: around 8 years old, around 50. Before we moved to the place where I saw snow for the first time, those sensory age milestones were converted into rough year ranges and then matched against demographic data from the states Evan said they had lived in: New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Nevada, and a few passes through Texas. The Arizona DPS Analysis Unit coordinated with law enforcement agencies in those states, using Evan's list of locations to trace houses Rosemary had rented under false names, cash-only clinics, whose description matched, and even small churches, where the pair had received food assistance. Each verified location pushed the Rosemary-Evan travel timeline closer to completion, turning a string of vague recollections into dated milestones of reasonable accuracy. During cross-reference, investigators had to discard several initial theories. At one point they suspected Rosemary was part of an interstate child trafficking network, but financial records showed she lived in extreme poverty with no unusual large money flows. They questioned whether Evan might be mistaken about the number of interstate moves. Yet Rosemary's tax, rental and minor traffic violation records aligned remarkably with the life stages he described. Incompatible theories were gradually eliminated, making room for a more coherent picture. A male subject abducted Liam in Phoenix, removed him from the state within a very short window, then for unknown reasons, handed the child to Rosemary, who then kept him on the move around the southwest border region for nearly 3 decades. Returning to memories involving the man in the car, investigators focused on details Evan considered unimportant: accent, Arizona, or Midwest, manner of speech, rhythm, repeated phrases, any mention of going to work, the truck, or night shift. A few fragments surfaced. Evan remembered the man often listened to AM radio, talking about a football team not from Arizona, remembered a small tear on the back of the driver's seat, remembered once hearing the man argue on the phone with another woman about rent money. Those fragments, when fed into demographic and criminal record databases around late 1980s Phoenix, allowed the cold case unit to rescreen lists of men who owned silver sedans, worked night shifts, had histories of travel between Arizona and New Mexico, and had violence or child-related offenses. Suspect lists that had previously been circled and abandoned were reopened, now viewed in new light. Anyone matching the car description, smoking habit, radio habit, and travel pattern was flagged again. Thanks to this, the 36-year timeline no longer stopped at where Liam had lived, but began to crack open the question who took him in the first place. A question the entire process of mining memories from Liam Evan was steadily approaching an answer to. The information gradually extracted from Evan strengthened parallel investigative tracks, and once key data had been verified to a stable degree, Phoenix PD and the Federal Psychological Support Team began preparing for the most sensitive phase, the direct reunion between Evan and the foster family after 36 years of separation. The meeting was organized according to standards developed for victims separated from their families for extended periods, a model that prioritizes emotional safety on both sides and minimizes sudden triggers. The chosen location was a special contact room at Phoenix PD, designed not like an interrogation space, but as a neutral living area, warm, private enough, with a side exit so Evan would not feel trapped. Before the meeting, the psychology team spent time with Evan to help him understand context, that the people he was about to meet were not strangers, but his biological family, that no one expected him to display any specific emotion, that he had full authority to ask to end the meeting if he felt overwhelmed. Simultaneously, the foster family received equally specific preparation: no immediate hugging or kissing, no mentioning the abduction, no heavy questions, no pressuring Evan to use familial terms he wasn't ready for. Everything was structured so the first moment would not become a burden on someone whose childhood had been erased. When Evan entered the room, David and Marlene instinctively stood but froze mid-motion, remembering the instruction. The initial atmosphere was so tense that everyone breathed slowly, unsure who would speak first. Evan looked at them with eyes mixing weariness and curiosity. He recognized something familiar in their faces, especially Marlene's eyes, which reflected something that made him feel an inexplicable pull. Grace stood a little farther back, afraid to approach and add pressure, but when Evan's gaze turned to her, a brief silence made the entire room hold its breath. The memory of the light-colored fence and the little girl from long ago flickered in his eyes, unclear but enough to create a sensation of "I once knew you." The encounter had none of the flood of tears or shouting seen on television. It unfolded slowly, cautiously, with careful respect each person showed the others. The investigator observed from outside without interfering, allowing natural rhythm to emerge. Evan did not speak much, but a few simple questions, "Are you okay? Would you like to sit down?" were enough to find a shared pace. After about an hour, the heavy air gradually shifted to cautious warmth. When the meeting ended, the support team escorted Evan back to prearranged temporary housing, a secure residence for adult victims of long-term missing persons cases. That space allowed Evan time to adjust to the new reality without being overwhelmed, while giving the foster family time to process without the immediate pressure of being at their son's side. Post-reunion psychological care was activated immediately. Evan was offered therapy focused on identity reconciliation and handling conflicting emotions between the life he had lived and the life that should have been his. The foster family received guidance on communication, setting realistic expectations, and gradually rebuilding the relationship. Reunion was not just meeting in one room, it was the beginning of a long process to stitch together two lives that had been torn apart for 36 years, and that process had only just begun. The details gathered from Evan about the man in the silver car, a male voice, cigarette smell, AM radio, a tear in the back of the driver's seat, and fleeting remarks about rent money once systematized, allowed the cold case unit to return to the original pool of suspects from the early phase of the investigation. That list had previously been shelved for lack of evidence, but now detectives had behavioral patterns and personal markers to rescreen every case. Individuals with child-related records who did not own a matching vehicle were eliminated first, followed by those with solid alibis at the time of the abduction. What remained was a very small group of men who in 1988 lived near the Maryvale area, owned a silver 1980s sedan, and regularly traveled between Arizona and New Mexico, a pattern that matched the route Evan described from his early years living with Rosemary. The next line of inquiry focused on whether Rosemary had ever known or depended on any man from her past. Financial records and rental agreements showed she sometimes co-signed documents under different names. Most were aliases, but a few names repeated during the late 19. One of them, according to tax records, worked as a mechanic, was a heavy smoker, lived a nomadic life in the Phoenix-Gallup-Albuquerque triangle, and had owned a silver sedan whose registration expired shortly after. The scattered pieces began falling into place. The car matched Grace's description. The travel habits lined up with Evan's earliest memories. A mechanic's job made the tear in the seat logical, and the route passed through exactly the towns where Evan said he had lived with Rosemary. When the cold case unit cross-referenced the suspect's timeline with the one reconstructed from Evan's memories, the overlap became unmistakable. Housing records showed the man left Phoenix only days after Liam vanished. There was no evidence he ever returned to Maryvale, and night shift garage work records from North Phoenix matched Evan's recollection of an out-of-state sports news broadcast on AM radio. Yet when investigators traced the subject's movements over the following 3 decades, they discovered he had died in New Mexico in 2004 from alcohol-related health complications, leaving almost no personal records and no known relatives. The suspect's death made prosecution impossible, but more significantly, the autopsy report and old files revealed he had been investigated for child molestation in Gallup in 1991. Though charges were never filed, the case was unrelated to Liam, but reinforced a consistent behavioral pattern, combining every clue: route, occupation, vehicle, habits, connection to Rosemary, and Evan's memories. The cold case unit concluded this was the most viable suspect and almost certainly the person who took Liam from the front yard. Still, with no surviving direct witnesses, no preserved physical evidence of legal value, and a dead suspect for nearly 2 decades, the finding could only be classified as highest probability offender identification, rather than a prosecutable case. Though the kidnapper could never be brought to justice, the investigation still carried profound meaning. It gave the foster family a final answer, and confirmed that the cruel act was not committed by Rosemary, even though she later became an accomplice. With this conclusion, the offender file was closed as non-prosecutable, the only part of the case the justice system could no longer resolve. The conclusion about the suspect and the confirmation of Liam Evans' identity required Phoenix PD to complete the final step in a decades-long missing child investigation. drafting a comprehensive professional report that summarized more than 30 years of events, evaluated the initial investigative errors, and documented the factors that ultimately resolved the case. The report began by recreating the full timeline starting from that morning in 1988. The moment Grace turned away for seconds, the silver sedan leaving the neighborhood, the 911 call, and every search avenue pursued in the first. Those data points were then linked to Rosemary's movements, Evan's upbringing under a new identity, and the 2024 DNA genealogy breakthrough. The synthesis served not only to record achievements, but to illustrate how a child abduction can remain unsolved for decades without technological support. In the section evaluating 1988 investigative shortcomings, the report highlighted limitations that were not individual failures, but products of the era. Arizona had no Amber Alert. Residential and traffic cameras virtually did not exist. Vehicle registration data was fragmented and not digitized. Interstate tracing was manual, and child interview protocols were not yet advanced enough to extract accurate information in the critical early hours. The report candidly stated that had these tools existed, police might have identified the silver sedan's escape route and triggered a federal search within hours, instead of letting the perpetrator vanish without a trace on the highways. Yet the most important part of the report was not what 1988 could not do, but the power of modern DNA technology that erased a Phoenix PD emphasized that no traditional investigative technique could have returned Liam to the records without Evan voluntarily submitting a sample to a genealogy service, and no agency could have connected him to the Fosters without NCMX multi-generational genetic analysis system. DNA technology not only located the victim, but reopened an entire interrupted timeline and identified the primary offender, a long-dead man without new testimony or physical evidence. The report then outlined procedural changes implemented as the case closed: expanded interstate DNA data sharing, fuller integration of family DNA into long-term missing persons lists, automatic incorporation of commercial genealogy data into alert systems, and modernized child interview protocols to minimize early information loss. Notably, Phoenix PD introduced a new long-term victim recovery protocol detailing safe temporary housing, long-term psychological counseling, and legal identity re-establishment support for adult victims found after decades. The report concluded with professional lessons for missing children investigators, the critical importance of the first 30 minutes, the value of recording every minor detail from child witnesses, how behavioral analysis reveals non-random repetition, and above all, the necessity of collecting family DNA from day one for future technological solutions. Phoenix PD stated that the Liam Foster case was not the victory of a single unit, but proof that technology can deliver justice and reunion, even when time seems to have erased every trace. As Phoenix PD's professional report was finalized, post-reunion support officially entered its stabilization phase, beginning a challenging reintegration period for both Evan, now legally Liam Foster, and his birth family. Returning after 36 years was not an instant fairy tale ending, but a prolonged process of adaptation, balancing real memories, false memories, buried memories, and the separate life Liam had lived before the truth emerged. In the first weeks after reunion, Liam lived in secure temporary housing arranged by Phoenix PD and victim support organizations. He was encouraged to meet his family in controlled, gradual sessions, from short conversations to low-pressure activities like shared lunches or walks around the grounds, without the expectation of immediately resuming a role he had no clear memory of. The Foster family, overflowing with the desire to make up for 3 lost decades, was guided to hold back so Liam would not feel swept into an alien world. Parallel to reconnecting with his family, Liam faced the seemingly simple but layered task of restoring his legal identity. A birth record frozen since the 1980s had to be reactivated, social security records re-established, tax, health insurance, driver's license, and all identifiers merged from 2 lifetimes, Liam Foster and Evan Harris. DPS and Phoenix PD handled the paperwork so Liam would not be overwhelmed. Each step was carried out carefully to preserve both his civic rights and the very real Evan life he had lived. Throughout, long-term psychological counseling played a central role. Liam needed help processing conflicting emotions. Gratitude toward Rosemary mixed with pain over a stolen childhood, guilt for not remembering his birth family, fear of failing his parents and Grace's expectations, and disorientation at upending his entire adult reality. Therapists used complex trauma therapy and identity reconstruction therapy to help him separate tangled memory layers and rebuild a healthy life narrative instead of one built on gap. The Foster family received similar support, especially Grace, who carried the clearest memory of the day he vanished, and decades of survivor's guilt. She needed time to shift from sister who lost her brother to companion in her adult brother's reintegration. Within the family, changes happened naturally but were full of challenges. Parents had to learn to see Liam as the man he is now, not the 6-year-old from 36 years ago. Liam had to open up to people he had never known yet shared the deepest bond with, and Grace had to reconnect with a brother who once existed only in memory and was now a man shaped by a very different life. The first full family meals were often quietly awkward. Liam was unfamiliar with family traditions, and parents had to avoid accidentally triggering childhood stories he could not share. Yet over time, small moments, a smile at an old anecdote, a nod at something faintly familiar, a gradually more relaxed tone, showed relationships being rebuilt on slow but solid ground. Reintegration was not about returning to the starting point, it was about creating a new meeting point between two journeys, separated for too long, and the Foster family was learning to reach that point step by step, with the rare patience of people who had waited nearly 4 decades to see their son smile again in the home he left at age 6. And during that period, Phoenix PD completed the final paperwork to close the file under its new status. Victim recovered alive, family reunited, and the 36-year journey of an Arizona child became one of the state's most notable cold case resolutions. The case immediately made waves not only in Arizona but across the United States, demonstrating that even hopeless disappearances can still be solved when technology overcomes old limitations. Law enforcement agencies, victim support organizations, and the forensic community all viewed it as clear proof that DNA genealogy is ushering in a new era where decades-old cases can be illuminated by genetic connections invisible to the naked eye. The fact that Liam was found alive carried double meaning. It affirmed technology's role and reminded families of missing children that hope remains valid, even when time seems to have erased everything. In the final report, Phoenix PD marked the file victim recovered, offender unknown, a rare classification in child abductions, since most resolutions also identify the perpetrator. Liam's case proved that victim recovery and criminal accountability sometimes cannot coincide, especially when the offender is long dead or vanished from all record. Although the investigation pinpointed one male suspect as almost certainly the man who carried Liam to Silver Sedan in 1988, his death years earlier meant the law could go no further than an operational conclusion. That leaves an open question felt deeply by both the Foster family and the investigative community. What exactly happened between the moment Liam was taken and the moment he was handed over to Rosemary? What was that man's true motive, and why did he disappear from Liam's life after only the initial period? This is the gap that technology, memory, and testimony cannot fill, leaving the beginning of the case forever in the shadows of investigative history. Yet the unanswered questions cannot dim the case's overall significance. Liam was found, the Fosters were reunited, and Arizona was reminded that justice lies not only in punishing the guilty, but in returning victims to the lives they were meant to have. Liam Foster's story ends with a simple yet far-reaching message. Time cannot erase truth, and every tiny clue, even one buried for decades, can still become the key to unlocking a journey thought lost forever. When people refuse to give up, and when technology is placed in the hands of those who never stop searching. In the story of Liam Foster, the 6-year-old boy abducted in Arizona in 1988, and found only thanks to DNA genealogy in 2024, many details are tightly tied to American life today and offer us very concrete lessons. First, Liam vanishing in just the first 18 minutes, while Grace looked away, shows that one eye on the kid, one eye on something else, in the front yard, driveway or parking lot is still a huge risk, no matter how safe the neighborhood seems. In today's America, parents often believe quiet suburbs are a safe zone, but this case reminds us that a single passing silver sedan can change an entire family's life forever. Second, 1988 had no Amber Alert, no Ring doorbells, no snow, digitized license plates. That's why the investigation stalled. Today we have smartphones, home cameras, statewide alerts, but they only help if people actually use them, Install cameras, note suspicious plates, call 911 immediately when you see some strange guy hanging around a playground instead of thinking probably nothing. Third, the fact that Evan, raised in Utah, sent his own DNA to a commercial genealogy service out of curiosity about his roots is what unlocked the entire cold case. It reminds modern Americans that technology can be a powerful ally for justice, but we also need to understand privacy implications. Read the fine print about law enforcement sharing, and talk it over with family first. Finally, the Foster's persistence, staying in touch with NCMEC, chasing false leads for decades, still giving DNA samples years later, and the long-term therapy both Liam and Grace needed show that for victims and families, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live forward when the truth arrives too late. In a busy, high-pressure American society, the deepest lesson is probably this: proactively protect your kids. Trust your gut about anything odd. Use technology responsibly, and if tragedy strikes, don't hesitate to lean on community mental health professionals and the justice system, because sometimes justice arrives very late, but it's still worth waiting for. Thank you for following the 36-year journey that brought Liam Foster home to his family. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases resolved through justice and human perseverance. See you in the next video, where we'll keep exploring files once thought hopeless that still found their light. Liam's reintegration continued to receive support for many months, and during that period Phoenix PD completed the final paperwork to close the file under its new status. Victim recovered alive, family reunited, and the 36-year journey of an Arizona child became one of the state's most notable cold case resolutions. The case immediately made waves not only in Arizona but across the United States, demonstrating that even hopeless disappearances can still be solved when technology overcomes old limitations. Law enforcement agencies, victim support organizations, and the forensic community all viewed it as clear proof that DNA genealogy is ushering in a new era, where decades-old cases can be illuminated by genetic connections invisible to the naked eye. The fact that Liam was found alive carried double meaning. It affirmed technology's role and reminded families of missing children that hope remains valid, even when time seems to have erased everything. In the final report, Phoenix PD marked the file victim recovered, offender unknown. A rare classification in child abductions, since most resolutions also identify the perpetrator. Liam's case proved that victim recovery and criminal accountability sometimes cannot coincide, especially when the offender is long dead or vanished from all records. Although the investigation pinpointed one male suspect as almost certainly the man who carried Liam to the silver sedan in 1988, his death years earlier meant the law could go no further than an operational conclusion. That leaves an open question felt deeply by both the Foster family and the investigative community: what exactly happened between the moment Liam was taken and the moment he was handed over to Rosemary? What was that man's true motive, and why did he disappear from Liam's life after only the initial period? This is the gap that technology, memory, and testimony cannot fill, leaving the beginning of the case forever in the shadows of investigative history. Yet the unanswered questions cannot dim the case's overall significance. Liam was found, the Fosters were reunited, and Arizona was reminded that justice lies not only in punishing the guilty, but in returning victims to the lives they were meant to have. Liam Foster's story ends with a simple yet far-reaching message: time cannot erase truth, and every tiny clue, even one buried for decades, can still become the key to unlocking a journey thought lost forever. When people refuse to give up, and when technology is placed in the hands of those who never stop searching. In the story of Liam Foster, the 6-year-old boy abducted in Arizona in 1988, and found only thanks to DNA genealogy in 2024, many details are tightly tied to American life today, and offer us very concrete lessons. First, Liam vanishing in just the first 18 minutes, while Grace looked away, shows that one eye on the kid, one eye on something else in the front yard, driveway, or parking lot is still a huge risk. No matter how safe the neighborhood seems, in today's America, parents often believe quiet suburbs are a safe zone. But this case reminds us that a single passing silver sedan can change an entire family's life forever. Second, 1988 had no Amber Alert, no Ring doorbells, no digitized license plates. That's why the investigation stalled. Today we have smartphones, home cameras, statewide alerts. but they only help if people actually use them. Install cameras, note suspicious plates, call 911 immediately when you see some strange guy hanging around a playground instead of thinking probably nothing. Third, the fact that Evan, raised in Utah, sent his own DNA to a commercial genealogy service out of curiosity about his roots is what unlocked the entire cold case. It reminds modern Americans that technology can be a powerful ally for justice, but we also need to understand privacy implications. Read the fine print about law enforcement sharing, and talk it over with family first. Finally, the Foster's persistence, staying in touch with NCMEC, chasing false leads for decades, still giving DNA samples years later. And the long-term therapy both Liam and Grace needed show that for victims and families, healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to live forward when the truth arrives too late. In a busy, high-pressure American society, the deepest lesson is probably this: proactively protect your kids, trust your gut about anything odd, use technology responsibly, and if tragedy strikes, don't hesitate to lean on community, mental health professionals, and the justice system, because sometimes justice arrives very late, but it's still worth waiting for. Thank you for following the 36-year journey that brought Liam Foster home to his family. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases resolved through justice and human perseverance. See you in the next video, where we'll keep exploring files once thought hopeless that still found their light.